very long calls, and then to meet with him in person 4 times now. So this phone call from Xi Jinping was very helpful. But
population, they're not sure if it's touching, if it's air, if it's eating. What do you know about this?
Well, the original information we got is all from China. We're totally dependent on Chinese public health scientists, Chinese officials.
And they lie all the time.
And a phone call from President Xi Jinping to President Trump. As you know, part of the hallmark of President Trump's approach to China has been to talk to Xi Jinping on the phone at least once a month, very long calls, and then to meet with him in person 4 times now. So this phone call from Xi Jinping was very helpful, but we are totally dependent for analysis of the virus in the beginning on Chinese sources. Later on, when Italy and South Korea began to share samples of the virus, statistics of who was dying and of what age and why, the president got a much better understanding of the virus. I think that's part of the reason he's closed down travel to Europe. It's also part of the reason he closed down travel to China back at the end of January. So this is an evolving mystery, where this virus came from and how the Chinese do not want to take responsibility for what you just said, that it could have come from a bat jumping to another animal in turn to humans. The Chinese gave that as a theory, but they also persecuted the first 8 doctors in December who blew the whistle and said, this is extremely unusual. We don't understand. This is not flu. It's something quite different. The first 8 doctors were actually put in jail. Their speech rights were taken away. And the key guy was actually an ophthalmologist who saw this and blew the whistle. He's now died of the virus, but he was at first nameless in China. Now he's a bit more of a hero because in the West, we have talked a lot about his contribution. So we can't be exactly certain ourselves because the Chinese will not let American health scientists go to Wuhan and make studies, despite the president's offer to do that as early as the first week in January.
So maybe they have something to hide.
That's my own fear, is that they know more about the virus and how it was created and how it spread than they've told us. These wildlife markets in major Chinese cities, I've been to the one in South China, in Guangzhou. To a Western visitor, they're horrifying. You see live snakes or koala bears or small cats and
Koala
dogs.
bears? They eat koala bears?
Absolutely. This is considered a great delicacy. And if a Westerner says this is public hygiene gone wild, you need to close these markets, that is considered insensitive trampling on Chinese cultural superiority. Now, they recently told us that their Congress has banned eating of wildlife in China. But when the Western reporters have asked to go see these markets, and are they still open, China has said no. So this seems to be a very raw nerve with China. They don't want to take responsibility for the virus. They have started spreading rumors. In fact, even their foreign ministry spokesman just a few days ago said people should not say this virus originated in China. It could have come from outside China. Some Chinese with me and others they talked to have been calling the virus the Italian virus. So this is a very sensitive matter in China. I think the Chairman Xi did not go himself to Wuhan to look into the situation that whole first month. He sent his prime minister instead. He only recently last week went down himself. And even then he wore a 95 mask and only talked by video to some of the patients inside of one of the temporary hospitals. So this is a very delicate issue in China, and President Trump has been handling it very carefully.
All right, let's step back first. We'll get to our president. Let's deal with their so-called president.
Right.
First of all, the Chinese are now involved in a heavy-duty propaganda campaign. Their foreign minister, their various ambassadors, their state-run propaganda media is pushing out the notion that America started this virus. We were talking about American troops. They're even putting out more sinister conspiracy theories that we planted this in order to blame it on China, to affect their commerce, to undermine their communist system. They've also put out there that you're not to call it, as you pointed out, the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus, because that's racist. And by the way, that's been picked up by the American media that says don't call it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus because that's insensitive. That's racist. So there's a huge propaganda campaign going on now, is there not?
Yes, that's right. Some of it's done by Chinese embassies who are circulating letters and making requests that the virus not be called the Chinese virus. Some of it's worse. I fear they were trained in all this by the Soviet Union 30 or 40 years ago. And the Soviet Union, we actually caught them distributing materials saying the U.S. government created the AIDS virus in a laboratory called Fort Detrick, 50 miles north of Washington, D.C. The Soviets put out a whole narrative that AIDS was created by the Americans, disseminated by the CIA, and this was found credible all over the world because there's a social science theory that if you get your story out first, you get that first impression. That's what the Chinese seem to be doing now. They're getting out the idea that it's racist to call this the China virus. They've also gone a little bit further by telling stories that there were American soldiers here for this competition, or creating doubt about our motives. This President Trump has offered to help China. He's praised President Xi's handling of the virus. That to me is kind of a goodwill gesture at a minimum. In return, what we get back from China are these rumors that America is behind this, as you mentioned, Mark, to slow China's growth down.
But as an expert on China, you've watched them for decades. You've been there a zillion times. You're watching this. It's incredibly shocking to hear our media repeat aspects of the propaganda. The same media 3 weeks ago that called it the Wuhan virus or the Chinese virus are now lecturing us, don't call it that.
That's right.
So China has these victories in these propaganda campaigns. And the point of the propaganda is what? To tear down America and to sustain the communist regime in China?
Yes, their basic theory is that America's in decline and has been for 20 or 30 years. China's on the rise. The crossover point will be in 2 or 3 years from now. They've also got another theme that China is a better world leader than America. We first saw this in Xi Jinping's speech in Davos 3 years ago, where China tends to advocate on behalf of the rest of the world against the Americans, that we are heavy-handed or immoral or we have racial inequality in America. And our media, they are very concerned about reporters being expelled from China. They just expelled several Wall Street Journal reporters. We're taking counter actions to it. Secretary Pompeo has done some very excellent things to declare Chinese media outlets here part of the Chinese government that have to register before they go see anybody, because that's how their media functions. But our media has an understandable intimidation by the Chinese. We won't let people who speak ill of China come into China to work. We will expel journalists who write the wrong story. This has an effect on our media.
There are citizen journalists, which are really the only kind of journalists in China, because there's no real free speech newsroom bureaus over there. So you have these gentlemen like this lawyer and others who went right to the middle where this virus is.
Right.
And they've disappeared. They've been removed by the Chinese government. I don't hear our media talking very much about these people at all, do you?
No, I think it's the intimidation by the Chinese government of our media. To some degree, our media thinks China is still our friend. They're kind of stuck in the old way of thinking about China. They also obviously have no love lost about President Trump. So when they see him successfully working with China on the trade deal and on other matters, they sort of position themselves as, well, we're more friendly with China than President Trump is. It's a vicious game that's going to end up with our public becoming confused about the nature of China and beginning to accept the argument that we are in decline, our time as number one is finished, and China is on the rise. And the more this takes hold of people's imagination, the more they're going to adjust themselves to following orders, basically, from China.
Do you think our media, even more than being intimidated by the Chinese regime, is excited and motivated to trash our president while China is pushing its propaganda? In other words, the purpose of a free press is to inform the American people, particularly at a time like this, not to advance an ideology, not to ruin an administration or something like that. They seem to be exploiting this. Am I right?
Yes. No, you're right. One of the more sensitive examples is the Chinese continuing to poor mouth themselves. They say we are weak, we have internal problems, we will never, surpass America and be leader of the world. Anyone who says this is just manufacturing false stories. President Trump has said, and I wrote this myself, if Hillary had been elected, President Trump has said many times, China would have surpassed America and be number one in the world today. But it's not going to happen on his watch. So the Chinese hate this. They don't want the idea played up that Americans should be afraid of losing their global primacy. But I think that's what's happening. So we have a number of messages, and a lot of people in our government now, in various departments of our government, are taking a look at how we can counter these Chinese narratives. We're taking much more seriously Chinese writings over the last decade that have said narrative power is the most important thing a country can do as it's trying to surpass the old world leader.
When we come back, I want to pursue this. And despite the fact that our media and the Democrat Party, I call it the Democrat Party press, despite that force, that entity, trying to tear down the president, trying to paint a picture of a president who is not stepping up, trying to paint a picture of a president who doesn't know what's going on, you're here to tell us quite the contrary. He knows exactly what's going on, and he's addressing it. He's going to continue to address it. We'll pursue that when we come back. Welcome back, Michael Pillsbury. The impression that the Democrat Party media wants to create, whether it's CNN or MSNBC or the sophisticates at the New York Times or the Washington Post, is that we have a president who's not focused, he's not engaged, he really doesn't know what's going on, and so forth. That's not it at all, is it?
No, it's not. In the case of China, he actually wrote a book in the year 2000 laying out his strategy toward China. He repeated some of these points again in another book just before he was inaugurated. The basic theme is the Chinese are smart and they're strong. And we need to recognize how clever they are, especially in negotiations. So you see in the president's speeches, his comments, and his tweets about China, you see a kind of respect for the quality of their strategy. And he's got a very funny line he likes to repeat. I don't blame China. He says, of course China wants to be number one in the world. Of course they're trying to surpass us. Of course they're smart. I blame our previous presidents who put up with this and did not see what the Chinese are up to. So in a way, he's being flattering to the quality of Chinese strategy. And they have reciprocated. They sometimes express in their official media respect for President Trump. They should be attacking him, saying, how dare you say we're so smart and we're so strong. But actually the Chinese sort of quietly acknowledge, yes, we are strong and smart, and so are you, President Trump. And the negotiations have been just fraught, back and forth, reneging, walking out, leaking of each other's positions. A very, very tough negotiating period. Brutal negotiations. Very, very tough negotiations. But President Trump has said to me and others, I'm a deal maker. I want to deal with China. And they understand that. If you go into any main Chinese bookstore now on the mainland, you'll find Art of the Deal in Chinese.
But what you seem to be saying is he wants a deal, but not on their terms.
Yes, exactly.
He understands their terms.
Yes. When they reneged one time at one point, within 24 hours, he upped the tariffs. He went public and chastised them. He said, this is not acceptable. So that sent a message to the hardline group in Beijing. Our reneging didn't work. It was a test of the president when they took back a large portion of what they had agreed to. And he immediately knocked that down. There was a tense period. The stock market started going down. A lot of, panic in the media. And sure enough, the Chinese came back and restored a lot of the key concessions that they tried to renege on.
You've worked for other presidents, right? Mm-hmm. What other presidents have you worked for? Who else?
It goes back to President Nixon when I was at the Rand Corporation writing memos on China strategy.
Nixon? Reagan?
Yes, I was Reagan's policy planning chief in the Pentagon.
Bush?
Yes.
Any Republican president prior to this president who would have said, as quickly as this president said, travel ban China? I don't think so. I don't think they would have had the guts to do it, or the foresight to do it. And I like a lot of those other presidents. Travel, quarantine. Mm-hmm. We haven't had quarantines in over half a century. Mm-hmm. And this is before all the information came in. This is before our scientists had a real handle or grip on what this virus actually is. So instinctively, the way I see it, well, they say rely on the scientists. Well, he was relying on the scientists, but he's also relying on his own common sense, the president. That's why we have a president. And he says, whoa, this isn't something that was created here. This is something that took place in China, and we need to protect ourselves.
Well, and it's important that the Chinese asked him not to do this. They publicly said, please do not cut off travel from America to China. This would be a huge economic blow against China. The president did it anyway, in a very forthright way. And I think the reason is the quality of his bond, his relationship with Xi Jinping. They're sort of man to man. I've got to protect my country. This virus is getting out of control in China, and I'm cutting off airline flights. That's it. And the Chinese continued the cooperation, the limited cooperation they've had with us. I think you know that our CDC set up the Chinese Public Health Service back in the 80s under Reagan. So when Dr. Fauci talks about what China thinks, he's actually been on the phone with his Chinese counterparts. There is some level of cooperation. And I think that data helped the president decide, I've got to stop these airline flights to and from.
But when he made that decision, it's interesting. I like to feel it. I'm up on the news. I'm paying attention to what's going on. I don't remember any member of Congress saying, cut off China, travel from China. I don't remember the media pushing for it. He was way ahead of the game.
Yes.
Because he's in a position to have the information. But these are tough decisions you have to make. And I'm just concerned that he gets no credit for this. People, why doesn't he step up? Why didn't he see this earlier? From a Congress that was so busy with an impeachment trial, wanting more witnesses. We don't even hear about John Bolton anymore, by the way, do we?
No.
They shut down the Congress. It was paralyzed at a time when maybe they should have been holding hearings. Maybe they should have been passing supplementals to help deal with this rising virus in China, don't you think?
I do think so. The president doesn't get enough credit for that particular decision, but it's also true that he doesn't get enough credit for his deals with China. In a way, our left can't stand his success with China. Now, there's one exception. Bernie Sanders, not Joe Biden, but Bernie Sanders is really tough on China. Comes out of his labor union base because
he's more of a Stalinist than a Maoist. That's the way I would put it.
Well, other than Bernie, there's a kind of a grudging acceptance that Trump has succeeded with China, but you don't hear much about it in the media. And the fact that the Chinese continue cooperating with us, I think they're going to implement the phase 1 trade deal. A lot of things come due April 1st. Right. This is a miracle when the president says, no, I'm cutting off airline flights, but take it like a man. By the way, the president of South Korea should have done that. He now realizes by not cutting off flights to China, he's got a lot of dead South Koreans on his hands. Italy did not cut off travelers. There's massive tourism by the Chinese to Venice, Florence, Rome. They love Italy. Wasn't cut back at all.
And the European Union, which is exactly what the president said you're seeding this virus in our country from Europe, so guess what?
Yes.
You're banned for 30 days. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The SARS virus, 2003, that also started in China, didn't it?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, the Chinese were much more secretive in those days. We didn't have the relationship. We didn't have President Trump and President Xi having these monthly phone calls. So the Chinese attempted to conceal first the existence of the virus, then its lethality. Ultimately, it killed far more than the coronavirus has as of today.
Did it kill thousands?
Yes, it killed thousands. It was acknowledged by Chinese scientists later that it was another one of these examples of a wildlife in a market where the virus jumped, as the scientists put it, into human consumption and then spread. China claims, and it's partially true, the Chinese are doing a much better job this time than the 02-03 SARS virus. So friends of China are encouraged now to, to make this point that they're not as secretive.
In the American media.
Yes. Give them credit for improving, from 18 years ago.
I don't remember all the panic during the SARS virus. Is it a memory issue, or am I wrong?
No, there was some panic, but it was not
like this.
Considered to be economic, because in those days, remember, the Chinese GDP in 2001, 2002 was only 10% of our GDP. Their massive growth that President Trump talks about, that they're about to surpass us, that began over the last 20 years. So China was not a big factor in our economy the way China is today. In my view, and I think others share this, the effect on our stock market and our economy is because of this massive Chinese economy. They're at least 3/4 our size by one World Bank metric. They're considered to have surpassed us already 4 years ago. So if their big factories are shut down, which is what President Xi Jinping did, that shuts down exports to us. It shuts down components to cell phones. It affects the apparel industry. It leaves Walmart and Target shelves empty. Absolutely affects pharmaceuticals.
In a big way.
So the Chinese are now telling us this could be propaganda as well. But in the past week, since Xi Jinping went down to Wuhan, their new propaganda theme is China's going back to work. We've curbed the virus. Our big factories, they say 90% of our big factories are opened again, going back to work. Whether that's true or not, time will tell. But this was not the case in 2002, 2003.
During any time in the last several months, has Xi's reign been imperiled at all?
There's speculation about that, because in the 100 years of the Chinese Communist Party, every few years a ruler gets killed or pulled out. There's power struggles we know about, but this is extremely secret in China. So whether or not there's been a challenge to Xi Jinping is hard to know from the outside. He didn't come out in public for 2 weeks. He seemed to be putting all the responsibility on his vice president, if you will, his prime minister.
Potential fall guy?
Yes. Then it shifted more recently. So now Xi Jinping is wearing a mask. He's saying he was personally involved in all the decisions.
He's a hero. They're building up the hero.
Yes. He's now a hero who's curbed or basically defeated, they say, the virus.
Now, the SARS virus, that ended over about how long a period of time? Do you recall?
It ran about a year.
Were thousands and thousands of people infected, but a relative small percentage passed away. And do you remember how the media treated that? The media didn't treat it anything like the media is treating this. And I'm not saying we should downplay it. I'm just saying you can't turn on the television today without this thing being hammered. And they have the numbers up there like it's a basketball game. How many people have it, how many people they think have it, how many people have passed away, without any context. Okay, well, did they have heart disease? Was something else going on? That sort of thing. I don't remember that in 2003.
Well, SARS was under President George W. Bush, and he had a more bipartisan spirit. He didn't have the kind of basic nastiness that comes out of the Democrats these days. So I sense the effort to turn against President Trump for the re-election campaign that the Democrats now think they've got the issue. It's not going to be Spygate. It's not going to be Russia, Russia, Russia. They think this is a dream come true. If they can show President Trump is somehow incompetent or mishandling the Chinese virus, this is their path to put Joe Biden back in the White House.
Well, when we come back, I'm going to ask you, are the Chinese rooting for Trump or Joe Biden in this election? When we come back. Welcome back. Michael Pillsbury. The Chinese, are they rooting in this election for Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
Well, they like Joe Biden from his time as vice president. He made a number of trips to China. He used to brag. He bragged in a famous speech as vice president in Australia that he'd accumulated the most hours of anybody in the world with Xi Jinping. He hosted Xi Jinping to visit Washington, D.C. when Xi was vice president. So there's a bond there. Biden is also taking credit for a lot of what I would call pro-China initiatives. So they see him as somebody who would be a dream come true, that he would probably undo the Phase 1 trade agreement. He would undo the World Trade Organization efforts that President Trump has taken to get a reciprocity for America in trade deals. So they have to be rooting for Biden. Whether they would openly interfere is another story, because they might get caught or it might backfire and make President Trump angry.
Did Biden famously or infamously say that we're eating their lunch? Are we eating their lunch?
In the context of candidate Biden's remarks, were his belief, which was true 20 years ago, that China is relatively small in its GDP comparison to our GDP. But now, with them closing in on us or even passing us in some indicators, it's simply wrong for Vice President Biden to say that. I think he wanted to sound patriotic, like we're America, we don't have to fear anybody, but it's just factually wrong. And I've spoken with a number of Mr. Biden's advisors, and they acknowledge that it's wrong, and they're trying to get him to come around and acknowledge the massive Chinese growth, especially over the last 10 years.
You say over the last 10 years. Well, many of those years was the Obama-Biden administration.
Yes.
They were building those fake islands.
Yes.
The administration really did nothing about it back then, Obama-Biden. That's when they really peaked economically. They really did nothing to counter that. This president comes in with the tariffs, the punishing negotiations,
Right.
building up the military that had been degraded under Obama-Biden. Why would we expect anything different from Biden than we got from Obama when it comes to China?
Well, I disagree with you a little bit about the Obama-Biden administration. I think there was a split in the administration. I actually worked as a consultant for them. So I hate to have you think less of me, but I was the advisor to them on China matters.
But apparently they didn't listen to you.
I detected a split that Obama himself was angry at the Chinese over climate change. Ash Carter, the Secretary of Defense, was actually quite tough on China. He flew out to an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea with the press there and made a speech criticizing what you just mentioned about China and the South China Sea. At the same time, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, when he was Secretary of State, and Joe Biden, they were known as the softer side of the Obama administration. The Chinese themselves would say this to me, that they prefer to deal with Biden or Kerry or Hillary and avoid Ash Carter and Obama. So just an interesting Chinese view of the split of the administration.
The results are what they are.
Yes.
And nothing definitive was done. Nothing effective.
China Sea.
And how'd that work?
They violated it within 60 days.
It's remarkable, though, that we had one of our big ships in a Vietnamese port. They invited us. They wanted us there because the Chinese are grabbing underwater territorial rights that belong to the Vietnamese.
Yes.
We have these sorts of things going over former enemies. Then on the other hand, we have the Philippines kind of selling out to the Red Chinese, maybe closing our major, the Clark Air Force Base, one of our major bases there, that they want to close out. There's kind of turmoil taking place in that part of the world, no?
Yes, the Chinese have been more and more insistent that all the neighbors of China need to respect China more and not openly
In other words, surrender territory and so forth.
Well, the Chinese are far more tactful. They just want their new power acknowledged. And to some degree, President Trump has been able to counter that with a new initiative called the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Strategy that he's mentioned a lot. There's a lot of substance to it. It's countering Chinese financial offers, for example. It's taking seriously Chinese coercion in the area. President Trump likes to call his new strategy a place where nobody gets coerced by any major power. And I think his new strategy is working.
All right. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Michael Pillsbury. At the end of the last segment, you were saying the administration's taking a number of countermeasures really across the board.
Yes.
In trying to contain China. For instance.
Well, I think the president has succeeded in getting every single government department to take a new initiative toward China. The Department of Justice, for example, has what they call the China Initiative. They're prosecuting economic espionage far more frequently than in the past. They've been looking at the rule of law in China. It's seriously deficient. The FBI has expanded its number of cases. Their FBI director testified it's more than 1,000 cases now involve China. In the Department of Agriculture, there's been an effort to rebalance, to reduce our dependence on China. There's been a real push. The Chinese would not let us sell beef or chicken to China, supposedly because of health standards.
Well, I know it's not koala bear, but still.
Actually, they love our chicken feet. They go into a very fragrant soup.
Well, there you go.
But each department, one by one, is reevaluating what it's doing with China and finding ways to implement the president's decision that China is not going to surpass America while he's president.
What about this effort the Chinese have where, like a mortgage company or a bank, they go into the third world, they go into Africa, they go into our hemisphere. They lend these countries that are in dire straits an enormous amount of money. They have collateral like a port or a public utility. They can't pay it back, and then the Chinese acquire these assets. Are we countering that?
Under President Obama, it was not countered. This began about 2013, 2014. It's an initiative of Xi Jinping himself. They call it the BRI for short, Belt and Road Initiative. It's very clever. It's linked to rare earths and minerals they need for high-tech manufacturing. It's linked to their export markets. They want to use Chinese standards for the digital part of the Belt and Road. President Trump's strategy has been to counter these Chinese offers. He's got the Exim Bank now with a new mandate to counter these kind of Chinese offers. He's got a new entity entirely called the Development Finance Corporation that again counters Chinese offers. He's got a series of activities by the Treasury Department and Commerce Department to not leave these countries sort of naked to the Chinese attempting to pull them into Chinese export trade standards and a kind of monopoly on their trade with these countries. It's been especially effective in Africa. That's where some of the fighting back is now taking place. So this whole government approach the president has mandated is really something quite new. And the Chinese noticed that they respect this as something that other presidents could have and should have done, but never did. Only President Trump is doing it.
Even militarily. Military has said the greatest threat we had was China. And we have a space force.
Yes, that's because of China, I think.
One of the primary reasons was China's in space with killer satellites. They're trying to develop laser weapons to put in space to knock out our GPS capabilities, which could knock out our cutting-edge military strategic abilities on the ground and in the air, correct?
That's correct. They did a series of studies over the last 15, 20 years that they did not want to match the American military tank for tank and plane for plane. They wanted to focus in on our weaknesses. And they found out that space is our weakness. We have actually very few satellites for communications, bomb damage assessment, intelligence gathering. If they could knock those out in the first few hours of a war, they would blind the United States military. So they focused a lot on that. I think Space Force is part of the president's idea to counter it. In terms of the Navy, just counting number of ships, the Chinese have already surpassed us in the total number of Navy surface ships, submarines, etc. We claim to be ahead in quality. That's awfully hard to measure. If you look at the trends for the next 10 years, it really looks bad for the size of the Chinese Navy. They've also gone into cyber warfare in a very serious way. I remember Secretary Rumsfeld telling me in '06 how bad the cyber attacks were. It's only gotten much more intense in the last 14 years. So we have this across the board Chinese focus on our military weaknesses, while a lot of our military, for good reason, they still want to fight in the Middle East. They still want to be in Idlib province in Syria. They want to be attacking the Shiite militia in Iraq. They want to keep law and order going in Afghanistan. Secretary Mattis used to give really harsh lectures saying the war is no longer in the Middle East, it's China. But he wasn't able to turn the Pentagon
Yes or
around.
no? Has this administration refocused military and national security in a big way on China?
It's certainly trying to, but the power of inertia in our bureaucracy to stick with the old threat of the Middle East, it's still there. Congress is out ahead. They've gotten quite excited about the China threat. There's a requirement now to explain what China is up to the Congress.
All right, good. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Quickly. Our media really don't know what's going on, do they? They're not there. They're not invited there. They don't want to go there.
Or they're denied visas and expelled if they write the wrong kind of story.
Right. These citizen journalists over there, they disappear. The leading early doctors, gone. So basically our media is picking up what other media are saying, what other countries are saying, and so there's not a lot of real first-hand reporting on how this began and what took place, is there?
No, the Chinese were afraid about 10 years ago that the internet would be the source of information and essentially freedom breaking out in China. So they had a very serious effort that's been very successful to censor the internet and even put false stories up that are more pro-Communist Party. We see this a lot with the virus. Beginning at the end of December, certain keywords, including virus, were banned from the Chinese internet. They have a way of controlling what can appear. That's how they blocked the doctor's early warning at the end of December. So this Chinese computer censorship system is really quite effective in blocking our knowledge of what is going on in China.
But I want to end where we started. My great concern here is a lot of their propaganda is coming out of the mouths of American so-called journalists and critics of the President of the United States. They must be loving the attacks on the President, who's doing everything a President can do to effectively address this, while at the same time our media are not really focused on how this came to be, what's going on in China. They're not even revealing the propaganda efforts. So the President's in a tough pickle here, but I would argue he's doing a hell of a job. He really is.
I have a lot of praise for the President myself, but I also hear it from the Chinese, that they just wonder why no previous president ever took them on this way. And his whole government strategy is part of it. His toughness with Xi Jinping directly is part of it. But there's something else, that President Trump has a faith that America is not going to yield world supremacy to China. And he'll do pretty much anything to stop that.
All right, it's a pleasure.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Mark.
sir. Always. See you next time on Life, Liberty, and Levin.